In this next topic, we will continue to examine key elements of ritual and will now focus on structure, play, and childhood socialization. When talking about ritual structure, we can consider 1. Temporal or time structures, 2. Spatial structures, and 3. Frames. The structures of ritual are important because they lend meaning to various ritual elements. Just like syntax or word order affects the meaning of a word in a sentence, the order of elements within a ritual structure affects the meaning of those elements. Let's begin with temporal structures, which is another way of saying the sequence of events in time. How does the sequencing of events before, during, between, or after affect the meaning of different symbolic actions? Consider this. Kneeling often indicates submission, but sometimes it is a show of chivalry. How are viewers supposed to interpret the gesture of kneeling? Whatever comes before or after the kneeling may signal the meaning that is intended. Secondly, we can consider spatial structures. Does the placement of things in relationship to one another, inside, outside, in front of, on top of, underneath, etc., alter how participants are expected to interpret those different events and elements? The third structural element we want to think about is a frame. A frame completely surrounds something and sets it apart from everything else. Frames, especially play frames, are extremely common in ritual. Play is considered to be outside of normal social life. In play, people pretend. They do things that are imaginative, and play activities are thought to be inconsequential for real life. In fact, in play, we often do things that normally are fantastical, such as flying through the air, performing magic spells, going to Mars, or marrying the handsome prince. Or we do things that are forbidden in real life, such as fighting, blowing up buildings, killing, or achieving global domination. But as long as the play activity is framed as play, it is permissible. Gregory Bateson, the husband of the famous anthropologist Margaret Mead, introduced the notion of play frames in his essay, A Theory of Play and Fantasy. He said that when launching into play, we offer some kind of signal that we are entering play, and that whatever occurs within the play frame is not subject to normal social rules. Then, when we finish play, we also offer a signal that we are exiting the play space and re-entering normal social life. These signals are often very subtle, often nothing more than a raised eyebrow or a smile, but they are very real. Rituals are packed full of play, all suitably framed. Along these lines, we have already seen that rituals often include actions, images, and objects that would be seen as unruly, wild, taboo, sinful, or dangerous in everyday life. If you look closely, you can see that those unruly elements are framed within the ritual so that the participants understand that those elements are not to be understood as sanctioned, but that participants need to look to the elements outside of the play frame, what comes before, after, above, below, in order to understand how those unruly elements should be interpreted. This brings us to the next point about ritual, which is that it is a mechanism of socialization. Throughout the world, rituals are one of the key mechanisms in society for imparting moral lessons to children and youths, and even adults who need reminding. Socialization refers to the practices within a culture through which children and youths learn the rules, roles, values, and norms of the culture. Some of cultural learning is explicitly taught through conversation, but much of cultural learning takes place through visual and embodied pathways as children observe patterns of behavior and mimic them with their own bodies. Ritual, because it is highly visual and embodied, is an excellent vehicle for teaching children and youths about cultural rules and norms. French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu suggested that those elements of culture that are learned through embodiment are very powerful, because if they are not learned through language as a series of statements, they cannot easily be argued against. As he said, quote, "What comes unsaid goes unsaid." In other words, if something is never talked about, it is never disputed. Because so many of the lessons learned in ritual are learned through the mechanisms of embodiment, structure, and imagery, rather than language, the lessons of ritual are embedded deeply within our cultural systems of belief and behavior. For this topic of structure, play, and childhood socialization, we're going to look at 2 rituals with unruly elements, and we will consider how those unruly elements fit into the ritual structure in order to discern the overall moral lessons that the rituals convey. We will head first to Thailand, and you will read James Pruse's article on merit and misconduct, venerating the Bo tree at a Buddhist shrine. Pruse explores the mystery of how many religious rituals will contain within them behaviors and images that in everyday life are considered immoral. In the sacred Buddhist year-ending ritual in North Thailand, the young men who bring supports for the sacred Bo tree engage in acts that are considered immoral within Buddhism. They engage in drunkenness and violence, and images surrounding them hint at licentious sexuality, including sexual posters, big wooden pillars, and images of the Naga snake. He analyzes these immoral acts within the temporal and spatial structures of the ritual. As you're reading, think about what appears to be the purpose of allowing these immoral acts into the otherwise sacred ceremony. How are these immoral acts tamed by their placement into certain temporal and spatial frameworks? Also, as you're reading, make sure you understand the symbolic significance of the Bo tree and what merit making is. Later, you will read Cindy Dell Clark's article on Tricks of Festival, Children, Enculturation, and American Halloween. She takes a very different approach than Pruse. She points out that in the case of American Halloween, young children are not unidirectionally nor unproblematically socialized into ideal adult roles. Rather, they are encouraged to precociously assume powerful roles, to challenge adult authority, and to confront death, violence, and destructive antisocial forces from which they are normally shielded. Halloween can hardly be seen as a ritual that inculcates morality, or is it? Does it impart to American children some lessons about adulthood?